Okay. 近看了你不会 zoom in. Okay. It was definitely a bit of a culture shock, especially after spending 8 years at Meta and then over to TikTok. I think that was part of what I wanted to see when I made the decision to join TikTok.
I think we cover a lot of ground. I'm gonna check any questions.
我想想，我是 think on the fly.
Thank you, Ming, for joining us for the Echo channel. I'm so glad to invite you here and hearing a little bit about your career journey and how you deal with communication. I know you have been starting as consulting and stay in the big tech for the last 10 years. Can you share with us what's your career journey look like?
Sure. I started in consulting back in Singapore in the Boston Consulting Group. And then later on, I spent some time in my own startup before I decided that product management was the path that I wanted to pursue. And since then, I've spent about 8 years at Meta, in both across Facebook and Instagram, and then later 2 more years at TikTok, where I am currently.
So in those various environments, how do you communicate? And is there any style you specifically apply to different sides of the company?
It's a very big question because there are a lot of, I guess, different dimensions to which I think about communication. Maybe starting from my consulting career, I think that's where it set the foundations for my communications, because in a large consulting firm where you are consulting with executives and CEOs all the time, I think we were taught how to make sure the communication was very clear and concise, but the message has to get across. So a lot of times we would do our communications in presentations like PowerPoint slides, and you have to make sure the takeaways and the recommendations or the solutions are very clearly communicated with facts and details backing it up in the slides itself. I think that kind of set up my foundation for how to communicate, which is you need to always give people the takeaway. Don't make them guess what you're trying to tell them directly. And be very clear what you're asking for, and be very clear about the recommendation and the solution when you're doing that. So I guess that was the foundation, and then eventually it kind of evolved. As I joined the different companies, I have to kind of adapt to the tools that they use, the formats by which people like to communicate, etc.
What are different tools or different formats you communicate with the...
Yeah, Meta, I think we use a lot of messaging. I think messaging was one of those tools where you communicate very, very frequently on. And then we also have a workplace where we make posts of like, hey, here's the analysis we just did, or there's a major win for the product, or there is a product vision that you kind of wrote out and you want to communicate broadly. We use those channels for broader publications for people who want to read it within the company. We use messages for day-to-day communication. We write documents for presentations. Sometimes it's in a Word document, sometimes it's in slide format. Then you also use meetings or all hands for different types of communication, right? Like meetings are used for when you need a discussion to happen, or when you need to get some alignment with people. You also have the all hands for much larger communication, usually like, hey, here's how we've been doing in the business, and here are the things that we're going to do going forward.
So you have been experienced a lot of like different scenario for communication. How important do you think the communication skill in your career is?
I think it is like fundamental. Honestly, as a product person, if you can communicate, that's literally your job, right? You have to talk to the engineers, the designers, the business folks, and sometimes you even have to translate for them what they're trying to communicate with each other, because sometimes it could be really technical, the engineering, and then the designer is talking about something else, and you kind of have to bring everyone together. So I think the key here is really understanding who your audiences are and who you're talking to. They would all speak English, but they're not all speaking the same language, if you will. And they are kind of like, sometimes they are actually in agreement, but they think they're having an argument, and you have to kind of figure out. And I think good communication actually starts with active listening. Like if you don't listen, you don't understand what people are asking for. So a lot of times, instead of like starting with, here's my idea and here's how I want to talk about it, is really understanding your audiences and what they're talking about and what they're interested in.
One thing I'm curious about, you mentioned like kind of like bring designer and engineer to the same table. Is there any cases or examples you think of, you influence them in some way?
Yeah, a lot of times when we're trying to decide on how to build a particular feature, for example, sometimes my designers would come to me with a very beautiful plan on like how we want to execute all of this. And engineering would like, no, this is too difficult. This is going to take us like 3 months. We're not going to build it. But it doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be a yes or no. So I think like really understanding, okay, the designer is trying to address this user problem, and here's the fundamental user problem. The engineer is thinking about how much it would cost them, and they don't have that many people. They have a lot of stuff to build. Then you're like, okay, why don't we look at this problem again? Here's the thing we want to solve for. This is the user problem. Is there another solution? Are there other ways? And typically when that happens, the discussion is happening such that the designer is rethinking, okay, how do I solve for this? And the engineering at the table is like, can we do it this way? Because this would cut the amount of work we need by this amount, and we should test it out first and put it out in the market, test the MVP. If it works, then we can continue to invest in it. We shouldn't spend 3 months on something that we don't know for sure is going to work. So when that kind of discussion that you can encourage happens, then we can actually build a feature that would save all of us a lot of time and energy, and we are able to test it first before we proceed. But if the conversation ended there where they're like, we can build this, we can't build this, and it finishes, then you're going to be missing a lot of really good product features.
That's a very interesting perspective, because I feel like a lot of tech company, those discussions didn't happen very early.
Yes, and they all happen later on because they are not sitting in the same room at the beginning.
Yes, so like when it's happened late, it is putting people in a position that you react to the proposal.
Exactly. So I think that happens in a waterfall culture, right? Where like some PM writes some kind of PRD, pass it on, designer happily sit in the room design, and then pass it to the engineer, and they're like, sorry, we can't do this. And then end of story, just wasted everybody's time. That's why I always advocate for my teams where the core set of people need to be in the room together. You need to be sitting there together as you are planning out the feature, not like passing one thing along like a production line.
So I guess when you're mentioning you're leading the team, what are some of the communication tips or some of the advices you give to your teammates?
A lot of times I give them some kind of a template, because it's important for me when you're managing a bunch of people that they know how you like to be communicated to, right? So like for my direct reports, I'll tell them, hey, here's how I communicate. And I also ask them how do they like to communicate in our first one-on-one meeting. Then I would tell them like, here's how I do meetings, here's how I use documents. So if you need something from me urgently, ping me on message. That's the fastest way you can reach me. Do not even try emails. I never read emails. If you have a very long conversation and a lot of facts and important information to share, please write it in an organized way in a document. Don't send it through text like, hundreds of lines. That's not going to work. So write it in a document. Send me the link of the document in the chat thread. That would be easier because I can read the document and comment in line and tell them, hey, here, this one makes sense. Or if I'm reading a report or analysis, right, it's easier for me to do it in a documented form. So there are these different ways I kind of share with them. And also, I give them certain templates, because a lot of times you will get asked, or they are like, I need something from you, but they don't give you any context. Then you have to end up spending a lot of time asking a lot of questions for you to even get to the state where you can make a decision or give them some answers. So at one point I gave one of my teams this template. I was like, here is a template. If you're going to ask for something, first give me context, short paragraph. What's the context? What's the background? What are your options? Have you thought through? Give me option 1, 2, 3, pros and cons. Then give me a recommendation, because you're hired to give a recommendation. You're not hired just to tell me all the problems you have. So give the recommendation and then be very clear what you're asking for. Are you asking for more resources? Are you asking for extended timeline? Are you asking for subsidies or money? If you're not clear, I can't give you a solution. So if they present that, that saves us a lot of time, because usually I can read that through in a very short amount of time, and I can provide them with some answers.
So we chat a lot about how you communicate through your teammates, through engineering and designing, but also I'm curious about how do you kind of communicate to the stakeholder and manage the stakeholders?
Like the leadership, maybe?
I think also cross-team leaders, right? Sometimes we need to align like those big projects.
Yeah, I think it's the same principle that I ask of my team to those leaders, right? Because Firstly, a leader is very busy. They're looking over a lot of things. So you need to be conscious of how much time they have. Don't expect them to read like 3-4 pages documents, and they're not there to solve your problem. You should be giving them the solution. A piece of advice that I've gotten long time ago in my consulting career was, when you're writing something or asking for something, think about what the person needs from you. Like 2 steps ahead, right? Be ahead of that person. What is that person going to ask you? And then you think again, what's that person going to ask you if you provide that answer? So if you're always thinking that way, then you would provide the relevant and right amount of information when you are sharing something. So if you're sharing something to them, ask yourself, is this something they need to know? Why do they need to know that? And a lot of times it's like, I need to share this because if their bosses or their teammates ask them about this, they should know about this. So there's, for awareness, they need to have that piece of information so they can answer the questions. And if I'm asking them for help, they need to know the context, right? And what other things I've already tried. What are my suggestions and options, and how did I weigh this, the pros and cons of this before I give them a recommendation? So similar to how I ask my team to communicate with me, I kind of take the same approach to communicate with the stakeholders, and each of them is different. So depending on who you're talking to, they may be concerned about different things. So you need to tweak it a little bit from the original content that you're sharing.
I know your experience kind of like in Meta for 8 years. Do you feel like your communication style changed or evolved over the time?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the team that you're a part of, right? On the Facebook side, I remember that we used a lot of documents, like Word documents. So we wrote a lot of Word documentation and shared a lot of that. And then when I went to Instagram was much more of a presentation type of culture. Instagram was acquired by Facebook. So they still had slightly different culture at that point, despite being in the same company. Instagram, I mean, when I first joined them, they had beautiful slide templates, right? And it was like very clearly they communicated in slides. We probably didn't build any slides on the Facebook side. But on Instagram now, I was like, okay, now I'm switching from Word to PowerPoint. Luckily, I've done a lot of PowerPoints in my consulting career. So that kind of changed, I guess, because when you change the format, the content is also different, right? If you're doing a Word document, it's usually like different structures and you kind of write it down. But a slide is usually like there's 1 or 2 messages you want people to take away. And you need to think about the layout of the slide. Where do you put the chart? Where do you put the data? Where do you put the information? So I think that changed the nature of the presentation as well when you're communicating that kind of information.
So that's kind of like storytelling, right? Like
Yes.
How you tell the story in different formats.
Yeah, the storytelling part is really, really important. Like, how do you pitch a vision? How do you share a strategy? And we use a lot more visuals. So instead of just words, what you would use in a Word document, in a PowerPoint form, you need to use a lot of visuals for the impact of like showing the information and data.
I think on design side, it's very similar as well. Even people are looking for jobs, we have to build the portfolio, right? Like how you tell a good story in that case study is like so important for designers.
For sure. Yeah, and then a lot of times because of the visuals we need, we also use like prototypes, right? We work with our design team to build the prototypes. It says 1,000 words when you look at a prototype versus if you describe what this feature is about.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I read someone's book before, and one line he was mentioning, sometime to end the argument, you just need to show the prototype.
Just show them, show them something that works even better.
Link to what you just mentioned, like the content, how to work with the format is very important, and even considering like different scenario, right? I'm also very curious, when you jump from Meta to TikTok, your experience like US tech and Chinese tech, how is the communication style compared to each other?
Yeah, that's interesting. It was definitely a bit of a culture shock, especially after spending 8 years at Meta and then over to TikTok. I think I expected that because that was part of what I wanted to see when I made the decision to join TikTok. There is a lot more meetings in TikTok, in the Chinese company. For what reasons, I don't know, but there's a lot more meetings. And one of the biggest things that stood out to me was the meetings were really long. The meetings were usually like 2 hours. Whereas at like Meta, my meetings typically are 30 minutes, maximum 1 hour, unless it's like a big event, right? But on average, I would say 30 minutes, maximum 1 hour. But at TikTok, the average meeting time is like 1 hour, sometimes 2, sometimes it's a 3 hours block. And I was kind of just surprised and shocked. Initially, it was a little bit of a, why are we having such long meetings? And then later on, I've kind of learned that, it was just a very different way of processing information. So at Meta, typically, I would get a pre-read, right? I would read the whole document of what they want to do ahead of time. So I had my own time to slowly rethink about it. And then when we meet, you assume that everyone has already read the same information. So you start the discussion. Whereas at TikTok, the information is usually presented in a document, maybe like 6-10 pages long. When you start the meeting, there are like 30 minutes for everybody to read in the meeting. So it's like, okay, set the timer 30 minutes. Everybody is quietly reading the document. Sometimes you read by section and then you discuss by section because the document is so long. So you will read the information and then start discussing a certain section and then read the information quiet time. So they have incorporated the reading time into the meeting time itself. And therefore, those meetings are significantly longer than the ones that I've had. I think there is trade-off. And it's probably a cultural difference in terms of why it was chosen to do it in one way versus the other.
How do you adjust to different communication style?
I think, again, it comes back to the same principle of understanding your audience, right? How does your audience communicate? Who are you trying to communicate to? And how do they usually communicate? I think that gives you a lot of hint in terms of what kind of stuff they like to be communicated to. So it was a bit of switch because I think first at TikTok, the language was different. We still use a lot of Mandarin in the meeting. So the language of communicating was already different. So that was pretty interesting for me because I think I typically work in English, but I had to kind of switch to speaking Mandarin in those meetings. And I think then the format of it also changes how or when people comment and what kind of stuff do they actually comment on. And when you communicate, a lot of times, for example, at TikTok, we use documents and we comment on the side of the document. And then we go into the discussion and we just discuss the comments. So a lot of the communication and discussion was happening on the document itself, where people were already commenting as they are reading at the same time. And the reason for the reading at the same time, instead of reading at your own free time, is that as people are commenting, some people are responding. So it's a live, silent conversation on the document where everybody's commenting at the same time. And then when time's up, then we go into a live discussion about the top comments that has not been resolved yet. It's actually quite effective. It's quite efficient in a way where you're getting people to think about that. And the content usually is very, very dense. It's a lot of information that's presented. So once I figure out, okay, that's the way that this company or this culture communicates, you kind of get into it and you kind of adapt to the style and how things are being done.
How you process a lot of information. I think like part of communication is about that as well. You mentioned earlier like how to be more active as a listener. Do you have any tips like how can we be better at listening?
I think part of listening is hearing, of course, like taking in what the person is saying. But I think it's also really understanding where that person is coming from. So a lot of times you want to know, who is this person? Why is this person asking this question? Because the question itself is only part of the listening, right? Like the other part of it is, who is this person? Is she the head of sales? Is she the head of engineering? The kind of things you're concerned about is very different. So a lot of times when I'm reading the comments, and if I don't know who that person is, I typically tap on their name to see who is this person, because that gives me the other part of the context for why is this person asking this question? What is she really trying to ask, right? What is the question behind the question? And sometimes the question itself is like, what is this number? Is not good enough for you to know what this person is trying to ask. Maybe the question she's trying to ask is, this number is not high enough. Right? And she's not saying that. She's just saying, what is the number? But in fact, you would think that, okay, she's asking this question because she thinks it's not high enough. How do I answer this question such that she can understand the context and the background and it truly answers the question she's asking, but not explicitly asking? So I think there is part of like understanding who the person is. And also then if you look across different meetings, not just that meeting itself, you can get a pattern of the types of questions certain people typically ask. And then you kind of figure out their stream of thought. Like, what are they thinking of? What are they worried about? And for me, it's always about like, what are they thinking about? What are they concerned with? Because only if you understand that, then you can actually truly answer their questions.
I think one perspective when you mentioning is understanding the person you are trying to communicate is so important to me as well. Looking at the address book is just like one of my habit, right? Like learn which team he or she is on, what product he's working at.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's super important. Otherwise, you really don't understand what the question is about.
I'm also very curious outside of your day-to-day work communication. When you communicate with your, for example, direct report, how do you communicate for managing up and also when you discuss promotion, those kind of topics?
So again, it depends on the person that I'm talking to. It goes from like a really senior, high-performing person to maybe like a more junior or even like a lower performing person. That conversation varies greatly, right? And typically the way I manage folks is I try to understand how much they can contribute and how independent they can be. If they can be independent, a lot of the independent good people like to be left alone to do their thing. You do not bother them, right? You give them a clear objective and a clear goal. Let them do their thing, don't bother them, and help them out when they need you, and tell them that you'll be here if they need to discuss anything. Those people are happy that way, if you give them that option. Of course, you find out if they want that, right? So usually in my first one-on-one, I ask them, like, what is your working style? How do you like your manager to be? Where do you think your manager can help you out the most? And everybody has a different answer to that. So once you actually understand that, and you need to make sure this person can perform. If the person cannot perform and wants to be independent, then you can't let that happen because you're still responsible for the end goals. So when that happens, you let them be. And then typically at Meta, we spend like at least once every month to have one of our one-on-ones be a career conversation. Typically, what kind of stuff are you looking for? What do you care most about in your career? And then you help to think about how to help this person. I remember one of my very first managers at Facebook, she did this very interesting exercise with all of her direct reports. We came to a room and she would ask you like compensation, promotion, recognition, learning, and a bunch of stuff. Rank them for me what you care most about. It has to be ranked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It cannot be equal, right? It cannot be like everything is important. So you rank this for her. I think from there, I also then understood, oh, this is actually what I care about. Because before she asked me that question, you wouldn't have thought about it. And I've since used that with all of my reports because that tells you very clearly what this person cares about the most and how you can help this person and how you can motivate this person as a manager, right? If this person cares a lot about compensation and promotion, right, then the path, the things you're going to think about to help this person is different from somebody who is like, I just want a lot of learning opportunities and recognition. Because everybody is kind of like different people have different love languages. This is a different preferences. And I think once I understood that, it helped me better to kind of help my reports in terms of what are the things they care most about and how I can do my best to help them and offer them the opportunities.
Do you have any tips for storytelling? Like, how do you tell a better story?
Someone whom I've worked with at Meta was just really good at this. And he kind of taught me about it when I asked him. I remember that time was during COVID. And his job was really to rally a lot of people within the company to come together to come up with some product solutions to address, like it was COVID, what kind of product should we be building for people? How do we help the small and medium businesses? So he was a very unique leader in that he doesn't have direct reports. He's an IC, but a very senior IC. And he has to gather like hundreds of people within the company. And we all have to kind of work with him, even though he doesn't have direct authority over us. So it was very impressive. And I kind of got pretty close with him and we started working very closely together. So I asked him, how do you do this job? It's very different from usually how people are doing this. And he kind of told me about how he learned about storytelling and how do you tell the story. And he wrote a few notes at a time where he started, I mean, we all knew what the COVID situation was like. There was no explanation needed. But he was able to paint a picture of like, here's the situation we're in, and this is what's happening, this is what's going to happen. So he kind of narrated the situation, got us to really care about why, the whole why behind this, right? Why this is important. He doesn't start off by telling us, here's what we need to do, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you need to follow my instructions. No, he started off telling us a whole story about the situation, what was going on. Why does it matter if we do something? What if we didn't do anything? Then what would happen? So it was, the whole conversation was about that. And then later on, he was like, now you guys see the picture. Here are the things that we should be doing, right? Then he talked about the what, and what should we be doing, and how do we do this? And then he talked about like, okay, now how are we going to do this? We're going to organize ourselves in these different teams. Like we're going to have these meetings, we're going to have these processes, right? He talked about all of that later on, but the most important thing that he started with was telling us and making everybody care about the situation, making us all emotionally engaged with it before we get to the doing the work part. Because people will do the work if they really cared about it. And I think that was his power. His power to bring together all these hundreds of people across different teams is a very unique skill that not a lot of people, not a lot of senior folks have, especially when you do not have any direct reports at all. You're just bringing together a group of people that you do not know. And some people might not agree with you. Some people will be like, who are you? Why are you coming here to tell me what to do? And I think the storytelling skills that he has was basically what brought it together. So I've been trying to learn.
It reminds me of the book Start With Why. It's kind of like that, making people sharing the same vision and understanding, figuring out how to do it. Yeah,
and I think the people who do this very, very well, I think they're the ones who could be really, really successful. It's a very important skill. I think I'm constantly trying to do more and learn more about it as well.
And it's kind of like influence without authority as well, right? Like, so you're trying to align people instead of telling people what to do.
Yeah, and I think people who are visionaries, they kind of need to do that, right? Because you bring together people who may not even know who you are. Why should they care about what you're talking about? And then if you look at historical figures who has been able to do this really well, Obama speeches and things like that, they're very good storytellers. They tell you why you should care, why you should even be bothered about it, and then they get you all emotional. Then they tell you their plans and strategies.
Yeah, that's very true. I guess like on the flip side, what are some of the mistakes you have observed in communication?
I think number one is assuming that people have the same context as you. If you're working on this project, you're probably in it every single day, right? So you know so much about it. Now you go tell your boss who manages 20 different areas about it, as if she knows what you've been doing every single day, every minute of your life. She doesn't. So I think a lot of the problems sometimes happen when somebody comes here and start asking you a question or start talking to you about something, and you're like, wait, take like 2 steps back. Start with the context, right? What is the context here? What is the background? Tell me a little bit more, and then we can get to that topic. Do not assume that everybody knows have the same exact context as you, and you should tailor this to your audiences depending on who you're talking to. I think that's the first mistake, that people just assume that people should know what I'm working on. The other ones are that I've seen more amateur making is they come tell you the problem, but really the problem is fine. Thank you for telling me the problem. I suppose you have thought this through. What is your recommendation? If you haven't done that, then you shouldn't come talk to me, because really that's your job, right? And I think sometimes communication, because people want so much speed, they forget to think about that they need to actually be thinking about solutions before they reach you. There are also others where like you're giving me a lot of information and a lot of data, but you're not telling me what you need help on or what you're asking for. So you're kind of making the person guess what your intention is, and that makes it just a little bit complicated and a little bit difficult to understand. And then I would add the last one is people using the wrong communication channels and not being respectful of other people's time. So a lot of people like to say, oh, let's have a meeting. Or even sometimes in a large company, they would ping you. You don't know who they are. They message you. I'd like to meet you for 30 minutes. Worst ones are they set up a 30 minutes invite on your calendar and you don't know who this person is, and nothing is written in the description for what this meeting is about or what this agenda is. Then the question to this person is, who do you think you are that I should spend 30 minutes with you? you should at least tell me what you're interested in, right? And I need to think in usually like on a busy day, I may have multiple invites on my calendar on the same time. I cannot be in 3 different places at once. So why should I decide to join your meeting? You haven't given me a good reason to do that. And typically people make a lot of these kind of mistakes that I've noticed. Then it becomes the burden of the recipient to like, hey, what's the reason for this meeting? And typically when I do that, I find out that they just want to ask me one question that they could have just sent me a text.
Yeah.
And then I answered the question already. Then they cancel the meeting.
Yeah.
But imagine if I had just showed up to that meeting, it would have wasted a lot of my time. So I think usually people should be more cognizant of what they're trying to do. I think basic courtesy is to tell the person that you're trying to take their time, what you need from them. And I'm just really surprised that sometimes you don't get a lot of that.
Yeah, I think in those scenarios, it is important to set up your boundary as well. Maybe it's like send out a message, hey, say, can you specify what is the meeting context for?
Right. Yeah, I think usually I'll do that. But sometimes if you have so many meetings and people do that, you might just have to decline it. Because if they don't say it, do I have to go educate everyone that you should actually tell me an agenda before I meet you? Sometimes you don't have time to do that, right? Because imagine you do that for multiple meetings in a day, you become really busy. So sometimes you have no choice. You have to decline it until this person figure out why you declined it. And then they will do the right thing. And then they will message you and tell you, oh, hey, I actually need your time for this. It's like, oh, okay, there you go. That's kind of what I needed from you.
You have been sharing a lot about communication and why communication play an important part in your career. Thank you so much coming to our channel and sharing a lot of your insights.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.